Hello, friends. Tonight we are going to talk about intellectual disabilities and what that means. We're going to pause, and I hope that you had an opportunity to watch that video about intellectual disabilities, and I wanted to add a little bit of information to that. So what I wanted to say is that it's important to think about those daily adaptive behaviors. Last week, we talked about skill deficits and what skill deficit looks like. Well, what an intellectual disability is really looking directly at what that IQ test is, what that intellectual quotient is. What we're going to be seeing is trying to, is something impairing your ability to find and keep a job? That are you going to need to be supported by others in order to maintain your lifestyle? What challenges are going to come about, and those challenges can vary from person to person. It could involve limitations to both intellectual and daily functioning, and that's what our intellectual disabilities, what we're going to come from. As you heard in our video, it starts at mild and moves up to profound, and those look different. And so the levels of support that are needed for all of that is different. So I want to talk a little bit about the level of support. And so on a standardized test, if you had a mild intellectually, relatively mild intellectual disability, then traditionally that would be a very smaller amount that you would score less on that IQ test. So the lower the scores indicate the more severe of a disability. And those really range, and it's related to age. So if you think about it, if a 3-year-old can't multiply, 750 times 45, you're like, of course, that's, I wouldn't think about that. But if a 25-year-old couldn't do that, then you might think that there's a complication. And so really that quotient is about the age of the child, and what level of intelligence that they're operating at, which is societal norms. And then you get to divide that and then times it by 100. And that's where we get our number. So IQ actually changes over time. Your IQ, the quotient number that you have, because it's going to change related to how old you are, right? So it's going to be important for us to be constantly talking, learning, and dealing with physicians so that we can really know and accurately assess if there is an intellectual disability versus a skill deficit. Remember, we have a skill deficit, and there's a possibility we have that skill deficit for a short period of time, and then it's increasing, and we figure out a different way around it. An intellectual disability typically is something that, even though your IQ changes, there was something that typically happened at birth, in the womb, Down syndrome, like fetal alcohol syndrome, something that impaired brain growth during that period of time, so that there's going to be a sustained complication for life. But how do we deal with that? That's the most important thing I want to work on, and that is giving more time and practice than usual. So a child has a mild to severe, but let's think about on the milder, moderate side of things. There's going to be an assistant like you who would be in a classroom and sitting right next to that child, and you're trying to teach them math, and what do you do with that? That instead of having concepts that are, conceptual, what is 2 plus 3, we are going to have even though they might be, 10 years old, we might still be using, pencils. I have 2 chapsticks and 3, pencils on my desk. So how many things are yellow on my desk? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's 2 chapsticks plus 3 yellow pencils. We have 5 things on my desk. so that we're going to actually use those tangible items, and then give more practice time. So that extra time helps with perseverance. That is one of the super important things. That we're going to try to be patient with the child and to deal with the problem, and then also give a lot of rewards. So this child is one who might have sticker charts for a longer period of time. The things that they get stickers for might be in smaller increments of things that we are celebrating, so that they can persevere, because keeping that motivation up is going to be important. In fact, that's something that we have repeated multiple times in this course, is the need to have motivation for our those that are challenged or have a neurodiversity. So yay, you added that correctly. You worked really hard on that. I saw how focused you were. You're going to make the goals in smaller, more reasonable steps, so that, we're going to definitely make sure they've mastered single digit addition before we're doing double digit, before we do triple digit addition. So doable, breakdown steps and tasks. We watched a video where you were seeing that, when with the child on I believe it was a child that was on the autism spectrum, and they, took off their jacket and they put on their jacket. And then you had to, you walk down the chair, you have a schedule, you sit down, you take off your jacket, you move. So having little goals and having those goals on a piece of paper in front of you, we've used that technique before, and that technique's going to be helpful. That technique's going to be helpful here too. Curriculum exists, and so, when we go into a classroom, we're going to have to follow, what is set for that age category. For the fifth grade, what are we going to do? So we're going to figure out what intellectual grade the child's at and be working with curriculum at that age, so that we are not frustrating and we're moving slowly at the right level. So it's one of the things. So that was number one. We're going to give them time to practice, and we're going to be very hands-on with that practicing. Number two, we're going to be adaptive, and think about what is functional about what we're trying to teach them. So it needs to be able to be applied to their life. We are moving through this child with an intellectual disability, and we're wanting them to succeed in life by themselves, have a job that's probably a simple task job, have social relationships. So we're thinking, we're not aiming to teach a child to have a PhD. We can if they want to, but there is a challenge in their brain, and we are trying to see how many familiar objects we can get them to recognize. We are trying to get them to have speech and understand words that are in common phrase and language that you would hear at the grocery store, that you would hear commonplace, so that in a conversation or a social setting, that they would have familiarity with those things and those words. We're going to be trying to think of their oral language vocabulary and thinking really of them understanding pieces, as opposed to, which is a different than reading, obviously. So often a student is the best person to decide what words are, helpful for them. And so participating in that activity can be really helpful with that child. Another important adaptive skill would be telling time, teaching someone how to read a clock, read a time, read fractions related to cooking, 1 cup, a half a cup, what that looks like. So those are the adaptive skills and functional skills that we are talking about. individuals can end up having a full knowledge or full understanding of things, but just develop at a very, very, very slow pace. So we are going to make sure that we're going to have those pieces that are super important for adaptive functioning to go first in what we're teaching. Okay. So that was number 2, is the adaptability and functionability of the skills that we're teaching. Okay, number 3, we're going to include the student deliberately in all group activities. So it's important for these children with intellectual disabilities not to be pushed to the side or not be involved in other things. So inclusion really is essential and key. It's what we found as really helpful. When the class plays a group game, the child should be part of that game. If the classmates do assignments, and the child should be part of that assignment. We are trying to foster acceptance of the other children and helpfulness of that child towards the other child, picking something up, handing something, saying, here, come over here. No, you're supposed to be over here. And you would be just astounded how lovely children are. We talk so much about bullying, but really children, normative children tend to be lovely, can be very lovely at younger ages. With a child who has an intellectual disability or any type of challenge in a classroom, if we give them an opportunity to have that child be involved and belong. This way, it's beneficial for all the children in the classroom, as well as helps everyone to learn and not just be focused so much on the disability, but just as the learning and growing as a team together. So intellectual scores, they do spread, and there's always going to be a spread in a classroom, from normative children to, the most profound disabilities. About 1% of the United States population, and most of them are male, fulfill a criteria for an intellectual developmental disorder. So that is a small percentage, and yet it's super important for us to address all of those needs. So we talked about IQs earlier and how they are on a range. What I want you to really think is that IQ, intelligence quotients, is adjusted by age. Again, it's going to be what your mental age is divided by your chronological age times 100, and that's what your IQ is. So it's going to change over time. What's important to know is, in general, we are anticipating that the average increase is about 3 IQ points for every 10 years of age. And this is what's called the Flynn effect. And meaning that as time goes on, we are thinking that there's better nutrition, increased access to information, there's more familiarity with multiple choice testing. And so there is a question on whether, someone back in 1920 who took an IQ test and someone who takes an IQ test today, that our IQ tests are higher, and they're wondering, is it because we're smarter, or is it because, people are used to taking tests, that kind of thing. So I wanted to put that out. There is a value in an education setting to IQ testing, so that we can know and understand how to measure that piece of intelligence, just so that we can give and provide extra support for children. And that could look like that person that's just right beside you, during class, to help out with that. There's been a few intelligence scales as I am wrapping it up here. But in general, I want you to think about You are not going to be on the assessment side of things. You are going to be taking a child as they are.